the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Board. Kate Stewart, the board chair, and I can't believe it's our April meeting already. Time flies. Thank you for everyone who's joining us today. It's good to see folks in person, and thank you to our members who couldn't be here in person but are joining us virtually. And I know all of us are starting, or many of us are starting, our budget season, so I very much appreciate everyone joining us today. We'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if those in the room can stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, just as a reminder, for our meetings, audio and video are being live streamed on the COG website through COG's YouTube account. And please note, for those of us here, the boardroom is going under renovations, and so we only have one projector working today, and staff has provided printed copies of the PowerPoint presentations at your seat. A new thing for our meeting today, to help local businesses, we're trying out a new initiative to feature different local restaurants for our COG lunches. And to do this, we're working with a national catering platform that was founded and headquartered in Arlington County. It's called Hungry, and Hungry enables local chefs to provide delivery services to businesses. Today, we have lunch from Chicken and Whiskey. This restaurant has 2 locations in the district and is led by Chef Enrique Lemardo. And while the restaurant features Peruvian food, Chef Lemardo is from Venezuela, and in addition to his restaurant, he is very involved with helping and feeding immigrants in our community. So hope everyone enjoys the food today. And if you know of a local restaurant in your jurisdiction who can deliver to our meetings, please let the COG staff know, because we want to highlight our local restaurants. The other thing, we have our Loudoun County Farm Tour coming up. On May 12th, all COG board members are invited to join for a farm and agriculture tour in Loudoun County. Along with COG Food and Agricultural Regional Member or our Farm Policy Committee, participants will be touring 4 different farms and learning about best practices to support environmental and economic sustainability. An invitation and registration link will be sent out to board members after the meeting today. I know Chair Randall is with us virtually and Supervisor Briskman is here. Would either one of you like to talk a little bit about this exciting event? I turn to Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am super excited to talk about this event. I have to admit I was a little envious when we went to a retreat recently and I was holding a tomato from Montgomery County, and I thought, oh, why am I holding a tomato from Montgomery County? We have farms too. So I worked with COG, the Economic Development Department in Loudoun County, to put together the farm tour. It's going to be amazing. We are going to go to Longstone Farm, which is livestock, grass-fed livestock. We're going to go to George's Mill Farm, which is an 8th-generation family farm. They do cheeses, gelatos, soaps, pork. Sounds like they do a lot of stuff. Potomac Vegetable Farms as well. And then lastly, we will be going to, and this is probably good, this is last, we're going to go to Wheatland Spring Farm and Brewery. And they are one of just a few of the breweries out in Loudoun County that actually source all of their ingredients for their product. So I'm super excited. I can't wait to have everyone out. Please sign up and join us. Thank you.
That is on May 12th. The next thing is our COG Leadership Retreat. As a reminder, the COG Leadership Retreat is scheduled for July 14th and 15th in Cambridge, Maryland. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure to register. And I think that's all I have for today. I'll turn it over to the Executive Director for his report. Mr. Mercer.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair. And I will try to be brief, but we have some good updates to share with everyone today. So that is a good thing. I want to start with a staff update and a thank you to Pat Warren, Pat is not good at retiring, and so she has been working on it, but helping me out quite a bit over the first couple months. And I'm happy to announce that Simone Ellis, who's next to Pat, is taking over her duties as the executive assistant in the executive office. So welcome to Simone. Simone is not new to COG. She comes over from the contracts and procurement team, which provided an opportunity and an opening for Pauline Gordley, who I think most folks know, who has been at our front desk for the past year. Pauline is now working under Rick Conrad and Julie Masag, our CFO. So that's always nice to promote from within. And later this month on the 26th is National Administrative Assistance Day. So I hope that's on everyone's calendars, and recognize the folks that help all our organizations run. So big round of applause to Simone and welcome. A quick preview for today, what we're going to hear about, and then a preview for our next meeting. We're going to hear an update on our long-term planning numbers with regards to population, households, and job creation. And this is going to be a two-part meeting. We're going to talk regionally today and what goes into that forecast, and then we'll talk locality numbers at our next meeting. Chris Piper will be here to talk about the ERIC voting system. As a follow-up, we had some good questions and thoughts at our last meeting, and we have a resolution for the board to consider. Chris was ran the elections department in Virginia the past several years and was vice chair of the ERIC Association nationally during that tenure. So he's a good person to have on board. And a big thank you to Monica Beirute Nunez, who runs our equity officer group. And we have a group of equity officers coming in today to talk about the good work that they're doing. Next month, we'll start out with a mini-series to hear about the infrastructure bill and opportunities for your localities. Each federal agency has a liaison whose mission it is to be aware of what opportunities there are for state and localities. And so the plan will be to start next month with an energy update, what programs are up and applications, points of contact, followed by transportation the following month. And a big thank you and shout out to Julie Masag, our CFO. We've been working on the budget, which will be presented at a future meeting, but a lot of legwork has been done to put that together. All right, Street Smart. The campaign for Street Smart kicks off tomorrow in Montgomery County. Chair Stort will be there along with County Executive Mark Elrick and leaders from the local and state level. We talked a couple meetings ago about pedestrian and bike safety issues. So this is going to be a campaign that raises awareness of those issues, coupled with increased enforcement of laws that protect people walking and biking. COG is also going to release the pedestrian fatality numbers from this past year. An article is out, and we'll make sure this is shared with you, and this is just some food for thought here in the Washington Business Journal yesterday. We're back to pre-pandemic levels of traffic and congestion in the district and the region, but we're at a little less than 50% capacity in our offices. So chew on that. We're not going to sit here and opine as to why that is, but we're almost exactly right back to where we were in terms of congestion pre-pandemic, which is certainly interesting. Conti, Tim Canan, and Nick Ramphos did a great job with the journal providing some data and had some good quotes in there, so we will share that. Out this week was a press release regarding a military installation resiliency report. It's focused on 4 installations in the region: Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, Naval Research Lab, Washington Navy Yard, and Fort Leslie McNair. And shout out to our team at COG for getting the grant here from the Defense Department, but also to the Defense Department and the administration for recognizing that we have resiliency issues all over the country, particularly around our military installations, and if they're not addressed, they do affect our preparedness and ability to respond. So we talk in that report about actions that can be taken to address vulnerabilities, including retrofitting stormwater pumping stations, assessing and addressing key climate risks to telecommunication systems, supporting the Blue Plains flood wall construction, and ensuring that lower Anacostia waterfront redevelopment is resilient. Battery recycling. So Chair Stort last week was leading a press conference to draw attention to what is a local and national issue of fire incidents related to improper disposal of batteries. And I will tell you, when this was pitched, I wasn't sure what kind of earned media we might get. We got a lot of TV cameras and print covering this. And we're grateful to Montgomery County fire officials for hosting the event and leading the demonstration there. Emergency messaging system. We had a lot of releases. I said a lot of good work being done this week. Shout out to Scott Boggs and our Homeland Security team. we have a pilot, first in the country. We're partnering with One Media 3.0, which is a subsidiary of Sinclair and News Channel 7, to use next generation broadcast to share advanced information to localities. And it uses over-the-air broadcast signals to effectively reach folks in your communities, particularly underserved audiences, with the type of frequency that's used. You get the alerts on your email, on your phone all the time about something that's going on, a fire incident, a road that's been shut down. This is a new type of technology that's using geocaching and really localizing those incidents so that you see something, if you're in Montgomery, that's happening in Montgomery, not happening in Fredericksburg. And it's a pilot first of its kind in the country. Bike to Work Day. This is one of those things that I learned when I came on board, that COG is one of the leaders in Bike to Work Day. It's May 19th, and we work with a number of stakeholders. If you look at the flyer we have out front, but the Washington Area Bicycle Association is one of the lead partners there, and we have 108 pit stops around the region. So we will be in touch with you in terms of hashtags and what you can say about it, but we hope you consider biking to work, encouraging your staff to bike to work that day, take some photos, let's generate some publicity around that. And then lastly, you have at your seats the annual report and a member benefits document, which is a new product. A big thanks to Steve and the communications team. The member benefits, this was something that when I came on board, I asked us all to think about, what does COG do? What are our deliverables to our members, which are the folks around this table and your constituents, in a way that's crisp and concise and uses kind of proactive language in terms of what COG is doing in your community. So I think it's a very, very good document. We'll be sharing it with your colleagues. And, when we come around and talk about member dues annually, we will also have a company that due statement of members' benefits, what you get for belonging to COG. So a big thank you to the staff for pulling this together. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And I do want to also thank the staff for the batteries event. I think it went very well. I'm glad we're getting the message out there on that. Next, we'll move to any amendments to our agenda today.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Gross. Yeah.
This is Penny Gross. I had my hand up. I have a question for Clark, if you don't mind.
No, go right ahead.
You had mentioned the resiliency work that's being done for military installations in DC and Maryland. We are doing something similar in Northern Virginia for Quantico, Belvoir, and Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall. I'm wondering if we shouldn't sort of incorporate that all together so that we've got all of the installations in the metro region. I'm not sure how this came about on the Maryland side. I know how it's coming about on the Virginia side since I chair the committee.
Well, Jeff King is here to help answer that question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Penny. Yeah, we're certainly aware of the great leadership you're doing in Northern Virginia. Great project with the MIR projects there. One thing we just learned in talking to our project manager at DOD in the closeout process for this first grant was that they will be funding, I think through the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, a regional collaboration to make sure that we're all getting together in Maryland, DC, and Virginia on these projects. So I think look to that probably in the next 6 months to 9 months. And
thank you. I think it's important.
I agree that it would be nice to also do something here at COG as well.
Yes, we need to incorporate all of the military installations in the COG region, even if it's just, we're doing this on one side of the river and it's something on the other side of the river. I think it's really important that we note that we all understand what is going on in the resiliency with the military bases. It's a lot of work and a lot of collaboration with localities. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I also see Vice Mayor Snyder, you have your hand up as well.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks for quite an agenda of action. Two areas that I was interested in seeing if the COG board and our COG staff could help us focus on regional efforts on fire safety issues. We seem to be having quite an epidemic of fires around our region, both in single family houses and multi-family houses. and also the issue of crime, particularly violent crime. Is there something we can do as COG through regional coordination to assist in the prevention and effective deterrence of violent crime? So thanks for giving me the opportunity to mention those two priorities and thinking to the future what value we could add as a council of governments. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I apologize to folks who are virtually. We've moved the screen, so I was looking in the wrong direction. But now I will make sure I am looking to my left during today's meeting. Any other questions? All right. Moving on, are there any changes or additions to the agenda for today? Okay, seeing none, we'll continue. We do have minutes before us from our last meeting on March 8th. Is there a motion and a second to approve those?
So moved.
Vice Chair Allen moved. I have a second from Vice Chair Lusk. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, we adopted the minutes from our last meeting. Now we'll move on to our consent agenda. We have two resolutions on the consent agenda today. They can be found on page 14 of the board packet. Is there a motion and a second? All right, Mayor Newton moved, Chair Dorsey second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, that passes. All right, now we're moving along, and we have our first item up today is our regional cooperative forecast on employment, population, and households. And this is our first item we'll be discussing. This is a draft of our regional cooperative forecast on long-term growth in employment, population, and households in the region. Today's briefing will provide an overview of the typical forecasting process, additional examination of potential long-term effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on future growth, and draft forecasts at the regional level. As we will hear, COG conducts these growth forecasts that take over a year of work to develop. These are the first forecasts to be released since the pandemic and will provide great insight into what growth we can expect to see in our region. I'm going to turn it over to COG Director of Community Planning and Services, Paul DeJardin, and COG Senior Regional Planner, Greg Goodwin, to explain the process about how we got these forecasts and how they were developed over the past year. Then we will hear from the COG Planning Directors Committee's co-chairs, Anthony Fusarelli from Arlington County and Sakina Khan from the District of Columbia. I want to note that today we will be only discussing the regional forecast, and that at our next meeting in May, we will be discussing and voting on the jurisdictional forecast. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies. This is full-bore allergy season, so it's the first time I have not had my contacts in for 2 weeks. So if you see me looking back and forth like this, it may be one of those situations. Very pleased to be here with you. A number of you have heard me talk about the forecast over the years. This is kind of a watershed event. This is the 10th major update to this process, and I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Greg. We'll go through the PowerPoint fairly quickly. You have copies at your place, and then, as you said, Madam Chair, our co-chairs from the planning directors to add a bit more clarity to the process. So very quickly, we're going to cover three things in the presentation. We'll talk about the process, the history, and whatnot. Talk a bit about the new economic assumptions. It's been quite a while since we have come to the board on the front end to talk about what are the underpinnings, what are the assumptions going into the forecast. I want to spend a few minutes talking about that because there's some very important trends that we're seeing. And then lastly, as you said, Madam Chair, talk about next steps because we will come back to you next month and ask you to actually approve your local government projections, which are the basis for the forecasting process. Background, I mentioned before, this is a long-standing process. COG established this in 1975. We have been at this for almost 50 consecutive years, 48 years of developing projections. They are the fundamental underpinning for all the technical work that we do here. As you see, they are in 5-year increments, projections all the way out to 25, 30 years into the future to maintain the inputs that are needed for all of our technical planning work. And there's a list there, as you see, this is the TPB, MWAC, CEPC, but also technical committees like the Water Resources Technical Committee, the Blue Plains Subcommittee. These are the official inputs that go into making key investment decisions for major capital improvement programs and projects. I won't touch on all these, but as I said, we have been at this since the mid-'70s. Those green highlighted areas show you the major series, the major rounds, round 5, round 4, round 7, round 8 or so. With the passage of the surface transportation legislation in the early 90s, the planning directors adopted a policy that permitted but did not require but allowed for updates on almost annual basis. Is that a little bit better? All right, I can hear myself now, so I know that's a good thing. Just call your attention again to those major green bars. We are talking about the last one, round 10, which we're going to seek your approval next month. Some of you have seen this before. This is the process, and it really goes to the heart, the integrity of why and how we do this. In the upper left-hand corner, we have an econometric model that is the foundation for the projections. It's a consensus process for the maximum amount of population and job growth we think the region could see from an economic standpoint. But that lower left box, the red square, if you will, that is the real strength. The forecasts at the same time are being developed by your local planning departments. In the near term, based on permitting and rezoning, dirt's being turned right now as we speak, and then guided over the long term by small area plans, comprehensive plans, zoning, and so forth. And then we reconcile them, as I said, into a consistent set of projections that are used widely in all of those different audiences I mentioned before. I'll skip through this slide. Again, you have it at your place. It really just denotes the specific steps. I've mentioned many of these in the past, but just to say, we've been on this journey now for 18 months. We began this in the thick of COVID. I had the pleasure of coming to this body about 2 years ago to give you an update on what were COVID's effects on the region's economy at that time. And what you'll hear in a few moments from my colleague Greg is we did stir those realities and continue to monitor those into the process for developing the new projections. Very quickly, I mentioned the econometric model. We obtained those projections from a subsidiary of Standard & Poor's, S&P Global. Key thing here in those bullets is that the regional model looks at things from an econometric standpoint. It says people and workers will follow jobs, and that's something we'll talk about in a minute about how that ripples through to things like housing supply, housing affordability, and the current incredibly tight labor market that we're wrestling with. And again, it's the benchmark forecast to which we index the forecast. A couple things that are coming out from that econometric model. What you're looking at here is a comparison slide showing the major employment sectors across the region. The blue portion of those bars is the number of jobs that were on the ground in 2020. The red portion is the increment, what we are foreseeing that would occur between 2020 and 2050. Again, keeping in mind 2050 is a new horizon, again, to serve the needs of the TPB in particular, but also to maintain that 25-year horizon. So what stands out? You look at that large bar in the center, that is the strength of our economy, professional and business services. In 2020, we had almost 750,000 jobs in that sector. That would, under the current assumptions, would be the sector that would add the greatest number of new jobs. 250,000 more jobs in professional and business services, management consulting, it's legal services, it's that full gamut of the incredibly talented workforce that we have here. If you roll that sector and all the succeeding one, educational and health services, leisure, hospitality, other services, you roll all of them together, 75% of all the new jobs that the model is projecting for this region would be in services. So again, a testament to the strength and resilience of our economy. A lot going on here, and we can come back to this, but this is looking at the changes in population in the region. Each one of those bars is for a particular year beginning in 2020 on the left and then concluding on the far right with 2050. So call your attention to a couple of little things. If you look at the bottom row, that's school-age children. So in 2020, we had 1,078,000 children under the age of 14 in school. Look all the way to the far right, we're going to have about 1.1 million school-aged children in 2050. Not a huge growth, pretty steady, if you will. What I'd really call your attention to is that top set of bars. On the far left-hand side, in 2020, we had 757,000 people over the age of 65. You go to the far right-hand side of that slide, we will have 1.2 million people over the age of 65. This is a national and a local trend. We are an aging population, and again, our economic competitiveness is imperative on our ability to attract and maintain talent. And again, there's the concomitant challenges of the human service needs that an aging population will bring. Again, we still have a growing and steady workforce population, but we are aging. Now, lastly, I'm going to turn to Greg here in a moment to talk about some of the COVID impacts. Question often comes up, well, how accurate are the forecasts? So we went back not just to the prior major round, round 9, but we went back to round 8 and looked at the projections. I call to your attention what is highlighted there in sort of the yellow. We looked at what was projected for employment. We're off of about 7.4%. But keep in mind, that was the pandemic year. We lost 373,000 jobs in 2020, which was completely unprecedented. If you factor some of those jobs back in, not nearly so far off. But look at population and households. We were only off by about 2% when it came to population, and households, we were off by less than 1%. Again, this is grounded in local government plans, zoning, and the tremendous work by your staff. So I'd like to do now, I'm going to turn to Greg. He'll spend a few minutes talking about the COVID impacts and then wrap up on some of the impacts.
Good afternoon, everyone. As part of the Round 10 work plan, COG and TPP staff commissioned the consulting firm ICF for technical assistance with the Round 10. And given the uncertainties of the market at the time, this work was a critical part of our work during the spring and summer of 2022. And the final product was a technical report or a technical memo that was produced by ICF for both the cooperative forecasting and for the planning director's technical committees. What I can say is that if you were to look at what the work of ICF consisted of, it would be 4 main tasks. And what you see here is one of their first tasks was to look at a range of forecasts based on the Round 10 data and our econometric model. And what you'll see here is kind of the band of uncertainty going into the future from our base year of 2020. And what you'll see in the later years in 2050, that the high, which is the green line, is about 4.3 million jobs in 2050. And if you look at the low forecast dotted line, which is the orange line, it was about 3.6 million jobs in 2050. Moving on to the population range, this slide is the range of population forecast. Again, the baseline forecast is the dotted blue line, and the high forecast is the dotted green line. And if you noticed, the high is 7.5 million people in 2050. But when you look at the low, which is the dotted orange line, it is about 6.3 million people in 2050. The final range slide relates to the range of household forecast. Again, the baseline forecast is the dotted blue line. The high forecast dotted green line, you will see in 2050 is about 3 million households in 2050. And the low forecast line, which is the dotted orange line, is about 2.5 million households in 2050. One of the other major buckets that ICF was commissioned to look at was the role of commercial office space in the region. And given the uncertainty of the time, they looked at a number of issues for us. And during the course of the spring and fall of last year, they brought forth to our committees data relating to ridership and regional traffic levels. We were also given a preview and a briefing related to office activity based on Castle Systems data. We also looked at vacancy rates provided by CoStar. We even had conversations about opportunities for office to residential conversions. given the high level of office vacancy rates at the time. Again, this is basically a snapshot of the spring and summer of 2022 when the work was commissioned. This next slide is some other products that ICF provided to us related to office utilization trends. And as you'll see on the left-hand side, they provide us some additional information from the Brookings about office square feet per worker. And this information was current through 2019. This next slide relates to the fourth bucket that ICF was commissioned to look at. And this relates to average household size, which is a very important and critical demographic marker that we track within the COG region. If you look on the slide on the left or the chart on the left, you'll see how we have tracked as a region with a household size of 3.1 in 1970, and you will see how that average household size has declined through 2000. But you will see that the last two censuses, in 2010 and 2020, there has been a slight uptick in household size for our region. The chart on the right is the forecast based on our round 10 draft numbers now, showing a household size of about 2.6. So again, we are assuming that household size will continue to decline over the next 30 years. And you will see that in 2050, that average household size declines to about 2.53.
We're back on. So thank you. We've told you a bit about the underpinnings. I want to spend a few minutes talking through at the regional scale what we're seeing, what are the actual regional projections, then we'll turn to Anthony and Sakina again to give you a bit more discussion at the local level. So what are we seeing? About 3.2 million jobs in 2020, growing to about 4.2 million in 2050. Again, a new horizon year, but about 1 million more jobs over that 30-year period. Population growth, 5.7 to 7.2 million, about 1.5 million more people over the next 30 years. And then household growth, about 2.1 million households to about 2.8 million in 2050, about 700,000 rather. Call your attention also to those last columns. We look at the relative rates of growth. This is actually fairly balanced when you look at job growth relative to housing growth. 31% increase in jobs relative to a 33% increase in housing. So compared to many prior rounds, many years ago, this is a much more balanced regional forecast, if you will. Peeling layers back very quickly, and we'll wrap up here in a minute. What you're looking at here are bar graphs showing in 5-year increments the timing and amount of growth that we foresee. So this first chart looks at employment growth, which you'd see in that second period, 2025 to 2030. That will be the period when we'd have the greatest amount of job growth, almost 194,000 net new jobs during that 5-year period. And then as you see, job growth tapers off into the future. Population growth, again, a similar pattern. The greatest increase in population, 2025 to 2030, about 289,000 people, more people in the region during that time period, again, tapering off, as you can see through the remainder of the forecast horizon. And lastly, related to that is the chart for household growth, second bar, again, 2025 to 2030, the greatest amount of growth with about 132,000 net new households during that period. So wrapping up here very quickly, and again, before we turn to Anthony and Sakina, we are expected to add about 1 million more jobs, and it's important to point out the impacts of COVID over the long term. This is about 200,000 fewer jobs for each forecast year into the future than what we had been previously anticipating. Again, this is that reset that we have seen due to COVID. But also it's a bit of that dampening that I alluded to about the aging of our population and our workforce and the need for us to be proactive about attracting young workers and talent. I mentioned this before, about 3 out of every 4 jobs will be in service sector industries. It's the strength of our economy. We're going to add about 1.5 million people. We're seeing growth in all age cohorts, but as I said, that 64% increase in the population above 65. It's not just a labor force impact, but again, it has social service needs and other impacts as well. And then lastly, I won't go through all these bullets, but I would call your attention to the last one, which is we still do need to do more to address our housing challenge. We need to do more when it comes to housing production, and certainly for affordability. And when we do receive the small area forecast next month from individual jurisdictions, we'll be able to perform the analysis about are we hitting the targets about the location near high-capacity transit and activity centers. Wrapping up here quickly, next steps. Today we're giving you the regional view. Next week, the 21st of this month, rather, the planning directors will review and act on the local projections, which again are the strength, the integrity of this process, and then we will come back to you in May to seek your review and approval of those forecasts. And then as you see, they will be widely distributed and widely used, not just in these four walls, but throughout the region. So I'm going to stop there and turn to Anthony and Sakina, our co-chairs, and let them add their comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm Anthony Fusarelli, Planning Director for Arlington, Virginia, and alongside Sakina Khan, Deputy Director with Office of Planning with the district. We are serving this year as the co-chairs for the Planning Director's Technical Advisory Committee, or what we refer to sometimes as the TAC. We're grateful for the opportunity to share perspectives on these forecasts from our Planning Director's TAC discussions, and also convey a few local anecdotes that really speak to the importance and value of maintaining current forecasts when it comes to the community planning that we do on a daily basis at the local level. After endorsing the Round 10 forecast work plan back in October of 2021, we as a group have received periodic updates as work on the forecast has progressed. This topic has been on, I believe, 6 of our meeting agendas during that time frame, and has also included briefings from the COG Forecasting and Data Subcommittee. The Round 10 forecast, as was mentioned, will be back in front of our group next Friday for review, discussion, and action by all of the planning directors. I'll now turn to Sakina to share a little bit more on our perspectives from the planning directors group, and also to learn a little more on how the district has approached this round of forecasting.
Thank you, Anthony. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, great. So on behalf of TAC, I can say that our group appreciated the rigor involved in developing the Round 10 forecast, especially in the face of great uncertainty. This uncertainty relates to impacts from COVID, changes in the economy, and whether these impacts will be sustained or not, and to what extent. The picture, as you can understand, is complex and evolving, and it was under this environment that the COG jurisdictions each prepared their population, households, and employment forecasts. In the face of this uncertainty, and taking a little bit of a deeper look at how the district developed its Round 10 forecast, the district employed a similar method as in previous forecast rounds, and we layered in updated assumptions that impacted household, population, and employment. As part of our approach, we developed forecasts for 2 periods, the short-term 2020 to 2035, and the long-term 2035 to 2050. And we reviewed our development pipeline as well as our development capacity. We also considered national, regional, and local factors. These included household density. For Round 10, density is expected to decrease due to smaller units in the development pipeline.
Ms. Khan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think people on virtually can hear you as well if you don't use the microphone. So let's give you the microphone.
I can hear her just fine.
Oh, okay. Chair Randall said she can. Are other people having difficulty hearing, or no? Okay, I think
no,
then
she's
okay.
fine. She's fine, Ms.
You're good. All right. Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Khan.
No problem. So I'll carry on using this. Okay, thank you. Just restating, we also considered national, regional, local factors, and these included household density. For Round 10, density is expected to decrease due to smaller units in the development pipeline, as well as changes in consumer preference. Another factor we considered is commercial vacancy. And in the case of round 10, this included changes in short-term office vacancy due to the pandemic and how it impacted employment. One of our final steps is to review and validate our findings, which includes comparing our results to historic patterns and reconciling with COG's regional economic model. So our forecast, the district forecast, represents our best estimate of the most probable scenario of employment, household, and population growth that will occur over a 30-year period in the district. As part of this, we forecasted our major areas of growth include Poplar Point, Capitol Riverfront, Vernon Place at Union Station, Hill East, and McMillan Reservoir. Once the cooperative forecast is finalized and approved by the COG board, it becomes an essential input for various key efforts, including our citywide and area-based planning that we engage with with our communities, as well as our master facilities planning efforts by partner agencies. For example, the forecast provides the baseline for the district comprehensive plan, which establishes the long-term vision for how the district manages change and guides growth in an equitable and resilient manner, both for current residents and future generations. So I'll now tell you that was a bit of a little bit of pulling back the curtain on the district's approach and how it ladders up to the cooperative forecast and our discussions as we participate in the TAC committee. And now I will turn it back to Anthony to speak about Arlington.
Thank you, Sakina. And just in a few final remarks, after Sakina's summary review of the district's approach and how it arrived at its forecast, I want to just briefly highlight, I think from Arlington's outlook, the important role that the COG forecast has in really grounding our community conversations about planning for growth over the next 20 to 30 years, including where we want to see that growth and ideally how we want to shape it. Having updated numbers, such as the round 10 that we'll have here, are very helpful in that they keep our baseline current, and they also keep our expectations for change current and reflective of our most recently adopted and completed plans. They present opportunities for us to better integrate and reflect recent planning and development activity we're seeing in the community so that we have that most current forward-looking picture. Having this up-to-date picture really helps us as a community as we plan for, as we implement improvements in public infrastructure, as we ensuring the service needs of our community are met. A few examples of this, very recently, our team undertaking updates and studies of our sanitary sewer infrastructure flow capacities goes directly to our forecast numbers that the COG sets at the region in order to do their important work. It also means that having embedded in the round 10 incorporates some really recent changes in Arlington, both at a long-range planning and development planning activity. It'll account for changes in the ramp-up of Amazon's headquarters in the Crystal City, Pentagon City area, a Pentagon City sector plan, which our county board just adopted just over 1 year ago, which can potentially double the amount of development in that metro station area, as well as other important studies for our Shirlington area and others as well. And it accounts for the significant major development projects totaling more than 3 million square feet of office and 6,000 residential units that have been approved since the round 9.2 forecast. We're also, from a team perspective, we're really pleased that as we in Arlington continue to refine our methodologies and our approach to how we keep track at the local level, that those improvements and those refinements can then be fed into the numbers that we provide to the Council of Governments and get incorporated overall, and really using a more land-based, grounded method of that approach and really focusing in on the most available data as it relates to vacancy rates as well as household sizes. So in closing, Sakina and I would like to thank the COG team and all the interjurisdictional partners on the Cooperative Forecasting and Data Subcommittee for the important and great work that they've done We appreciate how challenging this particular round is coming off of COVID and still learning and understanding more about the long-term impacts as we move forward together. But we fully support the round 10. We believe the numbers are solid and will be helpful for us to move forward tomorrow and years ahead. So thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Anything else? No? All right. Well, thank you for that. I think you just underscored really the importance of these forecasts for us. I think many of our jurisdictions had a number of questions, about COVID and the impact it would have regionally in our jurisdictions, and I think this is a great example of the work that COG does collaboratively in our region to provide some answers to that so that we can all plan for our futures here. So I thank you for all the work. I know it was a very complex time to do this, and we really appreciate it. As my colleagues get their questions ready, I'm going to ask two to kick us off. One question was, and this may be for a follow-up session, where we talk about 3 of every 4 new jobs expected to be in the service industries. Is it possible to, that's such a broad category, and given the amount of jobs we're expected to see added in the region in that category, is it possible to break that down a little bit more to see where we expect the job growth to be?
So it's a two-part answer. So in the charts that you have there, we can tell you sort of the breakdown within different employment sectors. So business services within services as a whole is the largest contributor. Again, almost 250,000 net new jobs. You can see the other sectors, education and health services and so forth. That gives you the top level of what is sort of the economic driver. If your question is more sort of the spatial, where would they be located? Okay.
No, it's more like under business, like as you said before as examples, there was legal, I think business service. Would IT be under there, technology,
we can
biotech?
Give you the full list.
That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, so I can absolutely give you the full list, but the business service traditionally, again, it's more what you think about when you think about management, consulting, accounting services. It's lesser degree IT, but it is that sort of value added that, with the consulting firms that are around the region.
Great, thanks. And then the increase in household size that we saw most recently, just curious if there was any thought on, is that, intergenerational households, given our housing crunch, COVID, people moving back home or not leaving, any insights into the household size growth?
All of the above.
Okay.
Absolutely, it is all of the above. I mean, we're a much more diverse region. We are seeing much more prevalent multi-generational households than we previously had before. So all of the above is the short answer, and is definitely at the height of the pandemic when so many, both of my college-age daughters were back with me. So it is very much everything.
Great, thank you. I'm sure we'll have a lot more questions as we continue this afternoon in our next meeting, but I'll turn it over now. Yeah, Councilmember Wolf, you up next.
Would it be fair to say that the expected decrease in household size ties back directly to?
Could you repeat the question? We can't hear him.
I'm going to repeat it because I'm not sure if folks online. The question was whether or not the change in household size was related to the aging of the population.
So it's a bit of a complicated answer, but the short answer is yes. Part of what you saw in that massive decline throughout the 70s was when baby boomers, that massive group of people, myself included, who were moving through the population, decided to forgo having children. And then suddenly in the 80s, baby boomers paired off and started having kids. But fertility rates across the nation have been far below fertility rates of our predecessors. we're having fewer children than our parents did, than did our grandparents. So a lot of that is really coming to bear. And then, as you said, Mr. Wolf, if we do not continue to attract more younger families, more talent, if you will, that is something, and again, this is a national trend. This is something that communities across the country are wrestling with.
Let's be honest, is this a rubber stamp, or are we going to get the opportunity to see the forecast, think about the forecast in advance before they're presented to the board?
I believe, given the schedule that was shown to us, that you all have another meeting on April 21st, and the hope is that we would be provided in at least in our board packets with something before May. But if there is any issue with the timing of things, I'm sure we can come back to it.
This is very important.
It is.
Speaking for our organization, I know our planning staff is engaged and involved, but they have not come to us about it at all with this information. I'm willing to say that's probably common for
I very much appreciate you raising that point, and we'll make sure that we work with the staff to ensure that you have the information ahead of time before asked to vote on anything. Thank you very much for raising that. Next, I have Vice Chair Lusk.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. My question is related to the first point you made earlier as well, and that is on the job growth. So really excited to see we have such significant anticipated job growth in the service-based sector, but I guess it almost makes me feel a little concerned in that we might have kind of an over-reliance in that particular area for our region. So I guess the question I have is, so as we think about this, are there ways for us to look at growing those non-service-based sectors and kind of having a conversation about that? Because I would argue that in terms of looking at product development and really prototyping of new items, we really aren't showing a lot of growth or showing a lot of work there. So I guess the question is, how do we move into the non-service-based and then thinking about product company development and prototyping as a way to diversify?
So a couple of things, and I apologize, I feel like I'm sort of dominating the answers here. We've had briefings at Region Forward in the recent past. There's a partnership that has evolved at the community college level to really have a career path, if you will, for young people who may or may not want to go on to pursue a bachelor's or higher level education. Part of what we heard, and we've had conversations about labor force needs and labor force development, there are lots and lots of jobs out there that do not require a college degree. You need the technical skills, basically, to keep 21st century widgets running. You need specific skill sets in IT. There are conversations, and we've had this at the CAOs, in the healthcare space, the tremendous needs and capacity building that they're trying to address. So the short answer is there is quite a bit of work. It didn't come out in the sort of top-level presentation that I did, but we are having those conversations, and there are definitely some opportunities out there. You're correct.
The only point I'd make is if you think about this region, it's a little different than like on the West Coast. You see their innovation and development of new products are the driver versus the services. So I think just trying to see how we might move into those areas. Thank you very much.
Next, I have Council Chair Denoga and then Chair Dorsey.
The question I have, not that I'm a big proponent of artificial intelligence, but I'm looking at professional business services and other services are still have, the largest share that we're looking at. To what degree, if any, did artificial intelligence get taken into account? Because some people think that's going to absorb some jobs. It seems that the service jobs will be the ones most at risk.
I'm just going to repeat that to make sure people virtually in the room could hear it. The question was regarding the impact of artificial intelligence, particularly on the service industry.
I looked at my colleagues who are up here with me, and the short answer, Mr. Denoga, it is still to be determined. It really is a good question. I think there are stories, and we did not explicitly assume what is an AI impact on the region's economy, because there are just so many unknowns. But I think we all need to be aware of it. You're correct. I mean, again, there are pieces literally every day.
Don't know what we don't know, but when that's your largest percentage, it's a concern. As an amusement, I'll let go of the mic. The growth in state and local government.
Thank you, Chair Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if this works for the people online, so I'll try to keep this brief. Just first of all, thank you. There are so many things important that we do at COG. There are none more important than this, so thank you to staff and our TAC co-chairs. I am really struck by the accuracy of the forecast. It's really to be commendable. Mr. Desjardins, you qualified it with the undercount in terms of employment, but given the COVID impacts, to me that feels pretty spot on. It might have been the most accurate of the three, but all were just incredibly high levels of accuracy, which is terrific. I know it helps us in Arlington really address one of the fundamental questions that we get from people in the community. You know, all this stuff that you're planning and doing, like, what are you solving for? And this really gives us a for that we're trying to solve, and it's based really on the broadest possible set of data, our entire interconnected region. So just terrific. My question, though, about accuracy is, do we actually track the degree at which this, how accurate the numbers are for each jurisdiction? So do we have a sense of how well we're doing on understanding or projecting the distribution of jobs, employment, and households? And can you provide that to us at some point?
I'm looking to the right to my colleague, Greg, who actually has tables going all the way back to the first iteration of forecasts. We could do it. I mean, I think part of it would be wrestling with, well, different horizons. The very first set of forecasts, it's hard to believe, only went to like the year 1999, which is ancient history now. That's sort of hard to believe, but we could do some comparisons, yes.
And I wouldn't necessarily be interested in historical, but just looking at maybe the last couple, just to see, how well we're tracking locally. Thank you.
Great. Next, Mayor Newton.
Thank you, and I echo my colleague from Arlington's comments. Great job on this. Very interesting, and I'm curious, as Rockville, Montgomery County, Gaithersburg try to position ourselves as a biotech hub a little bit, where you see life sciences, those, that network, is that under manufacturing?
To some degree, it would be manufacturing. To some degree, it is more in sort of the research space. So I think some of it, it's how the business is classified. Is it classified as a health sort of service, or is it classified as biomedical research? I think on a case-by-case basis, it's going to vary, but they're definitely within the broad service categories, and it's clearly a strength of the county.
Right. I'm just curious, in terms of looking forward, where we're going to put that.
Do you mean the number or the location? I think we can.
What percentage do you see in the growth? Do you see us as a DMV? Where would that fit?
It's a good question. I want to go back and look at the data a bit more. I think it clearly is one of our strengths. I don't have the exact number for you right now, but we can definitely look into it.
Thank you.
That's clearly one of our strengths.
Yeah, Mayor Jordan.
Well, thank you very much. I have a question, just looking at the population projections and the aging demographics, and I'm just wondering, what are the implications for that in terms of our regional housing targets? We put a lot of emphasis on housing affordability, perhaps not quite as much on senior housing or housing to accommodate folks that are getting a little bit older. So what are the implications for the changing demographics and the shift, the aging shift, and is this something that was anticipated?
It's something that's been anticipated. Again, we haven't had the opportunity to come before you to sort of proactively tell you some of these trends on the front end. I'll turn again to Anthony and Sakina, and they can talk about things like universal design and how planners locally anticipate it. But you're right. Are there going to be needs for more accessible dwellings, you know, at whatever level, be it single-family detached, be it multifamily, and whatnot. But again, Sakina and Anthony could tell you what is actually underway right now in the district in Arlington.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that question. Yeah, just a few specific examples to speak to. I think, you know, as we go back and look at the forecasts and what that picture tells us about the future, we in Arlington over the past several years, I think, have been focused increasingly more so on the needs of that older populations. We've made zoning ordinance amendments. The board has approved zoning ordinance amendments to some of our districts to make it easier and provide more flexibility for things such as assisted living or senior living facilities. We are doing a study now in terms of examining sort of the affordable component of that, and so what of our expectations would be for those types of projects. Last month, there was also an action by the board to permit later this year expanded housing options. One of the benefits we see as a community in allowing duplexes or small apartment buildings across much of Arlington that currently isn't permitted or hasn't been permitted historically is it does provide opportunities for some of that aging demographic to perhaps expand their property or be able to find another housing unit in the neighborhood perhaps they've been in for some time that otherwise wouldn't be there today. So those are just a few, you know, handful of examples that we've been working on in Arlington, but it is something we remain focused on.
And I'll just follow up by, you had mentioned the regional housing targets, and that's something that the district worked closely with COG as part of the Planning Director's Technical Advisory Committee, and the district developed its targets by 2025 for 36,000 units across all types of income levels, and then 12,000 of those units being affordable. So we've been tracking how we've met those, how we are meeting those targets, and we are on track. You know, COVID has obviously impacted the housing market in general and across the region and delayed certain projects. But I would say that as, you know, in terms of meeting the needs of seniors in particular, it is part of, it's part of the solution is making sure there's an array of housing options, including affordable housing options as needed, and making sure also that we have complete neighborhoods where there are services in place to support the needs of all residents, in particular seniors.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we need to continue to raise up the accessibility element as we focus on affordability. That accessibility is very, very crucial.
Great. Well, thank you, and I'm sure we'll have a great deal of follow-up on this, not just at our next meeting, but continue. And I do want to just clarify, because I think Mayor Newton and I had similar questions regarding the chart on slide 9, and just if we can unpack that growth, and particularly looking at the, you know, the biotech area. And I think other questions are, all of us, I think, in the region have seen increases in things like breweries, distilleries. Like, where do they fall in this picture? So maybe next time we can do a deeper dive into those different categories to give us a fuller picture. So again, I just want to extend our thanks for all of the wonderful work, and as my colleague said, that the accuracy is really incredible for all the work that you do, and is a testament to how much work goes into this and thought, and how important it is as we plan our local jurisdiction. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our May meeting. Our next item is we're going to be discussing the Electronic Registration Information Center, commonly known as ERIC. This conversation came up at our previous discussion with the COG election officials, and I want to thank Vice Chair Charles Allen for raising the importance of ERIC. This is a multi-state partnership to share voter registration. Maryland, Virginia, and the district are all members of ERIC, and in fact, I believe Maryland and Virginia were founding members of ERIC. Participation in this organization is essential for maintaining accurate voter registration lists And as I think we have all talked about prior to this, making sure that our elections are run well and that we can count on them and have accurate voter rolls, as well as ensuring people are registered to vote, is an integral part of the work that we all do in our communities. And so today, we are joined by the Elections Group Chief Operating Officer, Chris Piper. The election group provides resources to local and state election officials. After hearing Mr. Piper, we will consider a resolution supporting continued participation in ERIC. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Piper.
Thank you. Well, gotta use it. All right. Hold the button. Oh, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
No, is that on?
There we go.
There it is.
All right. I have an extremely loud voice, so I will try to speak quietly through the microphone. But thank you all for having me here, and thank you, Clark, for inviting me and the entire board. So I appreciate the opportunity. To give you a quick background on me, I actually started at the State Board of Elections in Virginia in 2003. In 2011, I became the Election Services Manager for the Department of Elections, now Department of Elections in Virginia. And in 2018, Governor Northam appointed me to be Commissioner and Chief Election Official for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I've worked with the D.C. Board of Elections and the Maryland State Board of Elections and Linda and Monica over the years, and they're great to work with, so glad to be here with all of you. As a result, as being Election Services Manager in 2011, Virginia was a founding member, along with Maryland, of ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. This was a new and innovative project founded by 7 states. 4 of them were led by Democrats, 3 of them led by Republicans. It was a bipartisan initiative with the Pew Foundation. We joined under Governor Bob McDonnell, and now Election Assistance Commissioner Don Palmer. He's a Republican appointee to the Federal Election Assistance Commission. And we worked hard to set up this list sharing information, voter list sharing information center. It has been unbelievably successful over the years. It was founded again under the Pew Foundation, and then as soon as it was founded, the member states took over, and the entire funding and the budget for the organization is funded through member states' participation and fees for membership. We are all under the states required to follow what's called the National Voter Registration Act, better known as Motor Voter. Motor Voter also contains provisions in it that require us to keep our voter registration lists accurate. We do this by several processes, one of which is utilizing the National Change of Address Program through the United States Postal Service. We utilize that list to determine if people have moved. While this is an effective tool, it is not at all complete. So ERIC was founded so that we could share our voter registration lists as well as our DMV data, motor vehicle data, with other states. This allows us to determine quickly and easily if registered voters have moved out of our state and into another state. Participation in the program is absolutely critical because if a state doesn't participate in the program, we don't get their data. And if somebody moves to that state, then if they haven't notified us that they've moved, it is hard for us to know unless it's through the National Change of Address Program. And again, that can be somewhat incomplete. It's not always done on a regular basis, depending on the states. So it is an important tool that we use. ERIC also provides national death data. One of the things you learn when you're an election official is that there is actually a master death file that the IRS carries, Social Security Administration, I'm sorry. This is important information that ERIC can provide to us to keep our voter registration lists updated. In short, ERIC absolutely is critical in ensuring that voter fraud is reduced. Because when a voter moves, we will know, we can notify that state, the state can notify us, vice versa, and it prohibits and prevents double voting or being registered in multiple states. And honestly, 9.9 times out of 10, the voter doesn't realize that they may be registered in 2 states. The assumption from most of our voters is that when they move and they register, that the governments are already talking to each other. We all know that that's not necessarily the case. This is a tool that we can use to ensure governments are talking to each other. Let's see. While I was commissioner of the Virginia Department of Elections, I also served as vice chair of ERIC prior to my departure. As a result, I've got an inside view of the work of the organization and worked to approve budgets and research improvements. And one of the initiatives that we started at ERIC while I was involved and as a member state in my role, we started actually comparing the list of those who voted with states who chose to join in on that. This information allowed us to compare the list of those who voted with other states to determine if any of these individuals had crossed state lines and voted in multiple states. We found that in almost every instance, the number of these violators is very, very small, but it is another important tool that ERIC provides to ensure that voter fraud is kept to a minimum and, in fact, wiped out. So I'm just here to talk about the fact that I think ERIC is an incredible tool. I think that it's very clear and transparent through the bylaws how it works, and the main focus that I would point to is the entire operation is funded through the states and their membership dues. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I thank you for the time.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mercer, did you have anything to add, or?
No, just thank Chris for being here, and I think I would just underscore ERIC's important nationally, but particularly in this region, with the amount of mobility between the District, Maryland, and Virginia, it's even more crucial. So.
Great. Thanks. Before I open it up, thank you, Mr. Piper, I'd ask that we do have a resolution here, so before we open it up for questions and discussion, I'd like to get a motion and a second for the resolution. Vice Chair Allen moved it, and I think I'm going to give this one to Supervisor Bailey, sorry, as a second. I'll turn it first to Vice Chair Allen, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it, and thank you, Mr. Piper, for walking us through that. I know we had, many of us had a conversation about this, I guess about a month ago or so, and I think you outlined it incredibly well. I think our action today is important, also in the context of what we've seen, a little bit of some nationalized conversation, but just bringing it back locally for us as 3 jurisdictions, we see the value, and I think it's important for us to be able to be on record noting that, especially as a region of 3 jurisdictions where there is a fair amount of mobility, this is one of the tools that helps us all work better, make sure that we have confidence and integrity in our elections, make sure that we've got as accurate as possible our voter rolls, and so I certainly encourage everyone's support for the resolution today, and appreciate the work here, and hopefully we're of one voice here that this is something that just makes sense for our 3 jurisdictions to work together.
Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Piper, for your work on this and in Virginia. We appreciate you. I noticed on your website you have a clarification that was published on March 2nd about some misinformation about ERIC, and, you know, we are hearing some crazy things happening around this country. So my question is, are there any members who are considering withdrawing from ERIC by any chance? Have you had to fight that fight yet? I hope the answer is no, but I'm just curious.
Unfortunately, you're correct. The executive director posted a letter, ericstates.org. I encourage all of you to check it out. There's a frequently asked questions section. There's also a letter from the executive director to the public about all of the mis and disinformation that we've seen surrounding ERIC. there have been several members that have left. It started last year with Louisiana. Since then, publicly announced Florida, Ohio, Iowa, West Virginia, which is a problem for Virginia. There is a law in Virginia that requires us to share our lists with neighboring states. North Carolina has never been a member. Tennessee has never been a member, but West Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. Have, and losing West Virginia, obviously, a big deal. If Maryland or D.C. were to leave, as you all have mentioned, that would be a big deal for Virginia with the transient nature of the country, but especially in this area. And there are several others. Texas is currently looking to pass. They have legislation that requires membership in ERIC, and Texas is currently looking to leave. So this is a I hate to use, for lack of a better word up here, a virus that this mis and disinformation has caused. So appreciate the resolution and the thoughtfulness that this board has given to this, because it is an important issue. ERIC is by far the most important tool that election administrators have to protect against fraud.
Thank you very much, and do let us know how else we can help. Thank you.
Great. Chair Randall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm perplexed right now, and I'll tell you why. All the organizations that are involved with this initiative, the Pew Research Center, all the states that are involved, are ones that I have just such great respect for. And for me, if you know me at all, you know that I talk about voter irregularity and voter rights all the time. It's in my DNA, I say all the time. My concern is that I'm hearing words from ERIC that have been used, in fact, weaponized from people who want us to believe that there's massive voter fraud going on in our country. The words election integrity, which was just used, is a word that is used as a term that is used often for people who want us to believe that there has been some widespread voter fraud in America or something, and there hasn't been. I mean, every study that is done has shown that there has been very little voter fraud in America. And so I'm a little concerned that ERIC has picked up the language and of groups and individuals, and in fact states and elected officials that I continually fight against, that try to make us convinced that elections are stolen, elections are fraudulent, elections are, and they're not, and we know that in this country. And so I'm perplexed, because it's, you know, what you are saying and who you're working with sounds wonderful. I mean, help me understand, is there a problem we're trying to solve? Because I've read countless, and besides probably you, sir, no one's read more articles on voter integrity and voter fraud than I have. And it's just not there. And so what I think I might do today is abstain on the vote until I learn more, because I'm just not comfortable with words like election integrity, and there's a lot of unanswered, and it feels like that this is words of a side of this conversation that I have been pushing and fighting against since the 2020 election, to be quite honest. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Randall, for raising this. Mr. Piper, would you like to respond?
I would encourage you, Chair Randall, to read on the website, ericstates.org, the information that's posted there. It is a direct rebuttal to the kind of information that you brought up concerns about, you know, and the issues that have been surrounding election administration since 2020, and I think probably really since prior to that. So I understand your concern, but I would encourage you to read through the information on the website, because I think it will ease your concerns very quickly.
Madam Chair, if I may follow up.
Absolutely.
Mr. Piper, I will absolutely go read, and I should have done that already, and I usually am a little bit more prepared for our meetings, and the fact that I haven't, I apologize that I haven't, but because I haven't, and only because I haven't, I will abstain today and go do my due diligence and my homework that I probably should have done already, but I do want to read that first, and so do not take my abstention as anything but my fault for not doing my homework on Eric already, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair Randall. I appreciate it. And as you're speaking, I'm reading through the language of our resolution again that we have before us, and I do not see any language that that you raise, which I think is incredibly important for us as a body to make sure is not in this resolution. I'm looking around the room. I know other colleagues are looking at the resolution as well, and if there is language we need to flag for us, we can do that. Chair Dorsey?
Thank you. I appreciate Chair Randall for bringing up the conversation, but I will note that part of the reason while I associate myself fully with the belief that election fraud is exceedingly rare when it occurs, mostly prosecuted, partly that is the result of what Eric has been helping groups do for a number of years in terms of keeping the voter rolls free of a lot of duplications that would make fraud more possible. So, you know, I actually think it's an essential organization from what I know about it in actually undergirding what is my firm belief that our democracy is mostly strong. And so for those reasons, I'm comfortable with even the allusion to voter fraud in the resolution, because I think it's within the context of what Eric was founded to do and what is actually successfully done over the decades, and in some cases is being punished for that success.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands or questions or comments, so I will call the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any noes? Any abstentions? Chair Randall, I'll note your abstention. All right,
Thank you,
then the
Madam Chair.
resolution
Appreciate
passes.
it.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for raising those points. Mr. Piper, thank you very much for joining us today, and the resolution passes. All right, our next item this afternoon is our COG Chief Equity Officers Committee. I ask them to join us. We'll be discussing efforts to advance racial equity regionally and within our local governments. The Chief Equity Officers Committee was created in 2020, and it organizes the Chief Equity Officer or staff equity lead from every COG jurisdiction to discuss regional racial equity initiatives and support individual governments as they create infrastructure and policies to advance equity. Today, we are joined by the co-chairs of the committee, Carla Bruce from Fairfax County, Tyree Davis IV from the city of Rockville, whose office I think I can see from my office in Rockville, and Amber Hewitt from the District of Columbia. I'm going to first turn it over to Ms. Bruce to brief us on the regional work of the committee, and then we'll hear about the local efforts in each jurisdiction. Thank you again for coming with us today.
Thank you very much for having us, Chair Stewart and other members of the COG board. My name is Carla Bruce, and I do serve as the Chief Equity Officer in Fairfax County. I will note—
Sorry, Ms. Bruce, I think, could you hold that a little higher?
Yes. Okay.
I do apologize, given that we're under construction here.
Yes,
Thank
I've
you.
heard that there are technical difficulties.
Yes.
So, yes, the COG Chief Equity Officers Committee came together in 2018 unofficially, but was officially established in 2020 and brings together the chief equity officers or equity points of contact in each of the COG member jurisdictions. When I first was appointed to my position in June of 2018, I was the only Chief Equity Officer in the Washington metropolitan region, and now I am happy to report there are 18 Chief Equity Officers or equity officer of some sort in the Washington metropolitan region, and so that's a very exciting development from the first time that I came to talk about the work that we're doing. We meet monthly and really serve as a hub for regional collaboration and a support network for what can be very lonely work in the work of being a chief equity officer. In our role, we do provide feedback to COG staff and committees on work that is happening in their respective areas. We share information and data amongst ourselves that could be supportive of our work in our own individual jurisdictions. And one of the most important functions that we do is that we support a training initiative in partnership with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity that has trained a number of staff from jurisdictions across the region on the Government Alliance on Race and Equity's framework for advancing racial equity. And we are in, I believe, our third cohort. We were delayed a bit because of COVID, but we just kicked off our third cohort of that. And this year, we actually are instituting a new partnership with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, a deep dive series that is allowing us to bring together people beyond just the general concepts around equity, but more specifically around policy and operational areas. And the first one that we are doing is around community engagement, or more inclusive community engagement. We really want ourselves to serve as a hub for collaboration, though. Many of the challenges that we face in our own individual jurisdictions are regional challenges, and this cannot be work that we do in silos. And so this committee has really afforded us the opportunity to get to know one another personally, but to get a sense of what's working and what's not working across our jurisdictions, and to work together in ways that support our individual work, but again, most importantly, advance the concept of equity, and specifically racial equity across the region. I'll take a minute to just talk a little bit about what's been happening in Fairfax County, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk about what's happening in their jurisdictions. So I've been in this role now for, in June, what will be 5 years, and I think what was really important at the inception of my role is that the Board of Supervisors had adopted, with our county school board, our One Fairfax policy, which was an expressed commitment by our leadership to advance equity and to acknowledge the inequities, the deep inequities that have existed and been perpetuated through the acts and policies of government over time. So in my role, one of the first pieces that I've been working on is building that foundation or infrastructure to do the work. And so I am a small team. I have a few other people on my team. We are embedded in the Office of the County Executive. We are not a separate department, but we have a whole county view of equity. And so beyond training, we have been developing tools and structures and partnerships both inside and outside of government that will help us in advancing our equity goals. Our activities around One Fairfax are on the county's website if you're interested in learning more. But the point that I want to make in particular is beyond being in a position of the Chief Equity Officer, this really has to be everyone's work. And having that solid infrastructure across the organization, but also at the leadership level is extremely important. And I'm thankful here to have Supervisor Rodney Lusk, and I see Supervisor Gross is online, and having their expressed leadership beyond just my voice, which is really promoting a set of actions and policies that are very supportive of what our policy said, that we will consider equity in all of our planning and decision-making and make Fairfax County a place where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and live to their fullest potential. But I'll hand it over to Amber first.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Amber Hewitt. I'm the Chief Equity Officer for DC Government and Director of the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity. I want to thank the board for having me and also acknowledge the DC elected officials and senior leadership in the room. I saw Ms. Perry leave a few minutes ago. I want to acknowledge Chairman Mendelson and Council Member Allen. You also heard from one of my colleagues, Sakina Khan, in a previous panel with the Office of Planning, and my office has worked collaboratively with the Office of Planning on several equity and racial equity initiatives. So I'll highlight a few of the ways that we are operationalizing the work in the district. And as Carla mentioned, this is everyone's work. So I was appointed in this role 2 years ago, and I often say that, yes, I'm the director of the Office of Racial Equity, but this is going to take a whole of government approach. So I'll highlight a few examples of how we are weaving the infrastructure throughout DC government. But I'll start with talking about a key deliverable. So my office led the development of DC's first Racial Equity Action Plan, and we're in the process of reviewing public comments from residents and stakeholders and hope to have a final version of that Racial Equity Plan later this spring. And that plan aligns around 4 goals, and we borrowed learnings from COG as well as the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. GEAR. The plan was also informed by a year-long resident and stakeholder engagement process. The first goal is around education and training for DC government staff. So how do we normalize conversations about equity, racial equity, and structural racism, what that means for ourselves and what that means for our agencies and our agency's line of business. The second goal sets key priority areas across 7 policy areas such as health and the environment, education, economic opportunity, among others, and also sets indicators that will measure within those 7 policy areas that will measure and track our progress over time. And all of those indicators will be disaggregated by race and ethnicity. The third goal outlines commitments to strengthening our community engagement, which is a key part of racial equity work. And the fourth goal is furthering our commitment to being an equitable employer, but not only in hiring, but when it comes to promotion and retention. And to zoom out a little bit, I'll talk about other ways that we've built the infrastructure. So in addition to our district-wide racial equity action plan, we're working with 22 agencies across district government to develop their agency-level plans. And we borrowed this model from the city of Austin, Texas, where we work with agencies in cohorts. So fiscal year 2022, we put out a call for agencies to work with us. Those agencies developed action teams. They went through racial equity training. They completed an internal department assessment of their policies, practices, and budgets. My team then did an analysis of that and provided recommendations that will inform their agency-level plans, with 12 agencies volunteer the first year and 10 in the second year. Another way that we're weaving this across government is that we stood up an interagency committee on racial equity that is comprised of about 35 members across 20 different agencies. And then as Carla mentioned, this can be sort of lonely work. So we've seen an increase in the region in chief equity officers, but we're also seeing an increase in the agency level within our jurisdiction of equity leads within agencies. So we are planning to convene those equity leads quarterly to provide support and to share resources. And the last thing that I will mention is what has contributed to our success. So in addition to the support from Mayor Bowser and the city administrator is where we sit. So we sit within the office of the city administrator, which gives us a line of sight and the ability to collaborate across government. We also provide updates and share resources with our council office of racial equity. And then lastly, a key contributor to our success has been strengthening our relationships with residents and having a stance of listening and learning with local racial and social justice groups. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tyree.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. How are you all? First, I want to say thank you to the co-chairs. Thank you, Monica, for your help. Thank you, COG, for having us. Mayor Newton, good to see you, and thank you for being here as well. I am the newest to this group, so we haven't been here quite a year, so our journey, it looks very different than Fairfax County and Carla, as well as DC and Amber. We are setting some of those same things, talking about setting the foundation, so defining what this work means for our organization and our community as a whole, doing that internal work so that we can take care of our house inside before we start worrying about what others have going on in the community, for it to be, you know, a bigger and better picture. And I also wanted to just talk about the time that it takes to build this work. I relocated here from Missouri, very different than this region as a whole, but we still have work to do in this region, in this work. So getting people to understand that just because we aren't in Missouri or Mississippi or Alabama, we still have our own issues for our respective jurisdictions and our respective region as a whole, because equity touches everything, whether it's housing, transportation, food insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. If you disaggregate data, you will see that there are disparities between people of color and white people as a whole. So I will talk about some of the things that we have done. We are a part of this GARE cohort that we talked about. So we have 10 folks across our organization that are undergoing this 10-month training. Okay, there we go. We have an election this year, so we are having with community engagement and ensuring that all the voices that live in Rockville are being heard and represented during this election period. We developed in conjunction with our Finance Department a budget equity toolkit so that we can look at where our expenses are being spent and what pockets are not being looked at as much, and then also doing that internal work. So when we developed an equity champions meeting made up of folks that are internal to the organization, because as Carla and Amber talked about, is going to be on more than just the three of us in our respective divisions and departments. It is across the organization, and it even takes a step up to you all as elected officials, because you all bore responsibility for ensuring that this work moves forward as well.
Great. Well, thank you for that update. And Mr. Davis, as you said, that it takes time to do this work, and I will just say, as someone who has been on the COG board for a number of years, I know some of my colleagues around here, to see the growth in chief equity officers, or as whatever different jurisdictions call them, really is remarkable. And we are glad to see you all in the member jurisdictions, as well as knowing that COG can play a role in bringing you all together and facilitate those conversations. And I'm really excited to hear that the focus is on community engagement this year with this third cohort. I think that is something that when we did the cohort among a number of us that did the GARE training as leaders in the region, we spent some time really looking at what is meaningful community engagement and how do we do that when thinking about our racial equity work. So I'm glad to hear, and I'm looking forward to what's going to come out of that. I think before I open it up to my colleagues, one of the things, and I think Chair Randall, I raised this at a couple of meetings ago, and wondering if you all are experiencing this as well, is, I know some of you have been doing this work for a while, some are a bit newer in the region. It seems that we are seeing across the country and even in our region much more pushback and a backlash on this work. It's never been easy work, as you all know, having a front seat, but I would like to ask you, what are the challenges that you're seeing right now regionally and in your jurisdictions, and how can we be more supportive of you all?
I appreciate that question. I'll respond first and then see if my colleagues have anything else to say. It has been definitely a shift in environment since I think there was a large growth in the number of jurisdictions who were expressly committing to advance equity work, really around that time frame about 2020, in response to the murder of George Floyd and sort of what were very apparent disparities in terms of the impacts of COVID on our communities. One of the challenges I think that we faced and have discussed as chief equity officers is the lack of understanding about the history of this region, sort of how it came to be, and so people sort of approaching this from an individual perspective versus looking at it at the level of institutions and structures, and how institutions and structures can produce inequitable outcomes. And so I think one of the things that has been really important in terms of pushing back is not engaging at an individual level, right? We know that this work is really driven by evidence, both quantitative and qualitative evidence. The data that we see, as well as the voices of the communities that we hear from, that is evidence of the inequities that we see. Particularly in Fairfax County, one of the things that I think has been important is the framework of our countywide strategic plan in making sure that equity isn't a separate part, sort of set aside. It is integrated into how we understand the success of Fairfax County and really the future of our county and our region, given that the growth of the region is really driven by people of color, and their success is really vitally important. And so if we can acknowledge that that's sort of what drives this work and not some of the individual misperceptions that have circulated in the community. We also sort of look at this work as inside and outside. So while we all described about the training and the structures that we've put in place internally, we also have relied very much on the relationships that we have with the community. So for as many voices as we hear that are in opposition to this work, we hear an equal number, if not more, voices who are in support of it. And I think, maintaining relationships with the community and those who have been most impacted by inequity has really been, I think, what's been helpful to me in my role. I think what's been helpful to our Board of Supervisors in terms of understanding that we are doing real work driven by the data, both quantitative and qualitative.
And I'll just add a couple points briefly. I agree with Carla when she mentioned the shift in the environment. We may not be feeling the brunt as much from other parts of the country, but given the Racial Equity Action Plan that I mentioned, many of you may be familiar with Mayor Bowser's Black Home Ownership Strike Force. We have, speaking of challenges, have sort of had pushback from initiatives like that. And I think what can help is consistent framing and messaging. So in addition to, this isn't just about individuals, but structural institutional changes, but also when we talk about advancing racial equity, it's not just closing equity gaps, but it's about improving outcomes for all people, and we all benefit. So I think if we all sort of coalesce around that type of messaging, that can also be helpful.
Does this work? Maybe. Yeah, there we go. So I'll just retweet what Carla and Amber said about a lot of their sentiments. I also have to think that we have to ensure that just because we hear that pushback, that we don't stop the work that we're doing, because as Carla and Amber mentioned, the voices that are loudest in the room aren't always in unison with everything. I also think there's a certain level of accountability that you and your colleagues must hold each other to, because as I mentioned, it isn't just on us to do this work, and we don't have some of the same interactions that you all have with your elected officials and colleagues. Also, I think that we have to think about the time it takes to do this work that I mentioned earlier, taking it back to 1619 all the way up to now. Think about all the time of oppression that we've had, and now that we're trying to focus on this, think about how much longer it's going to take to start to close those gaps and improve those outcomes. And also, I think one last thing I think that you have to take into consideration: who are you hearing from? As I mentioned, the loudest in the room aren't the ones aren't the voices of the majority. So, are we listening to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color? Are we listening to LGBTQIA+ people? Are we listening to women? Are we listening to other religious groups and all the other intersections that exist in society or in our jurisdictions when we're making decisions and when we're engaging in these conversations? And lastly, I think that we also have to start to, it's something that we are doing, in engaging in those uncomfortable conversations, because I will tell you, the spaces that I've been in, there are several times when I have been the only Black person, or I have to speak up for the voice of all Black people, and that is uncomfortable. So we have to ensure that our white counterparts and the rest of our BIPOC community is ready to engage in those uncomfortable conversations, because they are going to have to happen. And in order for this work to succeed, we have to engage in those conversations.
Great. Thank you so much. I saw Supervisor Bailey with her hand up.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? You're good. Carla, it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. And you
did give my colleagues compliment, Supervisor Lusk and Gross, but I think they're equally as fortunate to have you as well. And so I just wanted to say that because you have led the charge as we go through this journey of re-envisioning, crafting, and reframing equity and what it means. And so the key thing that I wanted to say to my Missouri friends, St. Louis, Missouri, was the listening piece. So how do we, and to our chair's credit when she said we went through the GARIS training, teach us how to listen, because there is an art as it relates to equity to listen, and that's something that teach us how to do that, and what does that mean in this climate of change in our region. It was a question.
All right. Any comments on that, or I'll turn it over to Mayor Newton.
I will just say in terms of, I know it wasn't a question, but we always have comments. You know, part of listening, I think, gets to what my colleagues were saying, is who are we listening to? And so it was very intentional that our first deep dive series was about inclusive community engagement. In Fairfax County, we recently adopted a inclusive community engagement framework. I know that the district has done something similar. We have various technologies that enable us to listen differently and better, whether that's virtual listening that was introduced to us during the pandemic, or, you know, going to people and listening. How we do the business of government has to reflect the communities that we serve. And so we want to use this opportunity to learn more about inclusive community engagement, not to know that we need to do it, but to begin to allow it to change how we do the business of government. I know particularly in Fairfax County, one of the things that we're struggling with, and I would imagine you're facing the same thing too, are some of the legislative limitations to doing things differently. And so we can implement a number of practices at the local level, but we do exist in jurisdictions where there are, you know, legislative things that need to change that would enable us to serve and to interact with our community in different ways. And, you know, getting back to the history part, so much of what was designed in an era that wasn't really, where there was not an intent to hear from everybody, by people where there may not have been an intent to hear from everybody. So I think taking that into consideration, right? So I think that there's a sort of practical how we listen in terms of our roles now, but realizing there are very real barriers to being able to do some of the work that we do differently. And again, to the role of elected officials is taking some of those challenges on and to enable some of that more creativity in again, inclusive community engagement at the ground level.
Great. Mr. Davis, go ahead, and then I'll turn it over to Mayor Newton.
I was just going to add to that. I think that I love me a good quote, and there are two that I'm going to share with you all. We have to listen to understand and then change mindsets and not listen to respond. And I think that as a society, we listen to respond instead of listening to understand and change what we're taking in. And then the second part that Carla talked about in inclusive engagement, I live by the quote, no decision for us without us. So you can't, as elected officials or we as chief equity officers can't make decisions from a paternalistic point, like we know what's best for our respective communities. We have to engage with the community to understand what is it that they need, because what they need may not be what we want to give them or vice versa. So those are just two things that I would quickly add.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mayor Newton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here and for the conversation. Ms. Bruce, it's great to see you again, and thank you for your leadership and your mentorship. I think that's very helpful for our DMV as we all have these conversations. I just wanted to explain one of the reasons that the City of Rockville chose the title that we chose, and it was a unanimous decision by our council, was because we want to, as the 8th most diverse city in America, according to somebody, changes every day. We wanted to incorporate all of our diversity in the city, the cultural, the religious, in mobility. We just changed the name of our Transportation Commission to, so it was Traffic and Transportation Commission. It's now Transportation Mobility Commission, because we want to include people in all methods of getting around, whether you roll, bike, walk, whatever. So, you know, to Tyree's point, that's what we're trying to do in the city, is not prescribe what we think is right, but listen to everybody and say, you're all at the table, we're all going to work this through together. So I just wanted to point out why we came up with the title that we came up with. Thank you.
And Mayor Noon, what is Tyree's title, Mr. Davis's title?
It is the advisor to the city manager for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We call it JEDI.
Great. Thank you. I like that, Mr. Davis. You're a Jedi. Wonderful. I'm not seeing any other hands or questions, but I just want to extend my thanks once again. It's always wonderful to have you all come to one of our board meetings so we can get an update on the wonderful work that you are doing, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you so much for being here today. And I think unless somebody has any other business to add to our agenda this afternoon, we are adjourned. So we're done, and you get back 7 minutes. I know I took some time at the other two meetings, and so it all works out in the end. Anyway, don't forget to sign up for our retreat in the summer, and have a good month, everyone. See you next month.